Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. We're here today to talk about, I guess we'd call it, in the spirit of underground comics, Printopia. And I have the creator, the cartoonist here joining me to tell us all about it. My pleasure to welcome for the first time onto the show, Bob Fingerman. Bob, thanks for taking the time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So yeah, I got a chance to read Printopia. Really interesting, topical, really a throwback to kind of those underground comics with an X, of the '80s. So for those not familiar, or the elevator pitch, we'll give you the chance here to practice it. Why don't you let everybody in the audience know what it's about?
Oh my God, my back's against the wall now as we're heading up to the 12th floor. Um, yeah, so it's what I do. I mean, for people who are familiar with me, I think I don't know if I'd call it a return to form, but it's a very character-driven piece about basically about very driven, creative oddballs, let's put it that way, who frequent a print shop on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And basically, you've got a framing device of the girl who works at the shop, who's featured front and center on the cover there, Darla. She and her coworker, Augie, and also her home life with her roommate, Candy. You have those sort of bookending and appearing throughout vignettes. I would call episodic vignettes about the different customers, sort of extrapolations of what are the lives of these people who are so driven to share their their creativity and ramblings with the world on paper.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it's really sort of heartfelt in a way because these creatives, they are striving. I think there's a line in there about print is dead, publishing is dead, which we've heard many times. And that extends to the comic book industry. People are like, the print is dead, but man, I mean, the love of comics and the love that these people have for the printed word, I think that's something that's relatable. So let me ask you about kind of the impetus of the project. Is this something, that speaks to you as a creator, something you've had in mind for a while? Because the framing sequence is brilliant. We've seen other stories and mediums do this before, where it's that central location, whether it be a bar or a office or whatever, and it's the people that come in and out. And it's just really fascinating to me to
yeah,
frame something like that.
Thank you. I mean, in a way, it's sort of classic workplace sitcom meets indie film, where it gets to, get a little bit deeper into people's psyches and so forth. I mean, one thing about the creative life is it's very internal generally, unless you're a performer. But I mean, if you're someone who's putting images on paper or words on paper, that kind of thing, it tends to be fairly solitary, which brings me to the other part of these character vignettes is all of them have figments. They all have these muses,
Hmm.
some of which again are featured on the cover, who kind of, I think, urge them on. They're both the voice of their imposter syndrome as well as their impetus to do what they do. Um, I don't know if you remember, it's not the most literary reference, but on the Flintstones, Fred for a while was tormented by a little green guy called the
Yeah,
Great Gazoo.
yeah,
Nobody
Gazoo.
else could nobody else could see him except Fred. So these are sort of the creative muse equivalents of the Great Gazoo. Yeah, I mean, I think they're sort of imaginary friends and in some cases imaginary frenemies. So,
Yeah, and they're a lot of fun, both in their diet, because they're all so different in their, some of them are quoting H.P. Lovecraft, others are, almost speaking in almost like a toddler like voice. We talk about poo, and visually they're very diverse as well. So it's a lot of fun. But that kind of brings me to my next point, which is these different characters, these different creatives, passionate about their creations, very diverse as well. But you also use it as a way to almost comment on where we are socially, which I found to be very interesting. No judgment, no saying, hey, this person is right or wrong or what have you. But I found that to be fascinating as well. Is that something you like to do with your work? Really kind of say, hey, this is where we are, and almost the absurdity of the human experience at times?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, it's if you're going to participate in the human experience, I think empathy is definitely something. Well, I look at it as a virtue. We're living in a very weird time now where empathy, for at least some people, is regarded as a weakness. I try not to think that way. But when I'm writing these characters, for the most part, I empathize with them. There's only one character in there who I think would be the villain. I know this isn't really a hero villain kind of story, but it's the only customer she denies service.
Right. Yeah.
And he represents again. God, there was parts of this book I was hoping would become dated instead of being more relevant than ever.
Right.
But that chapter is particularly relevant at the moment. But even with someone like that, there's humanity in everybody,
Mm-hmm.
or at least I like to think so. Some people it's harder to identify than others, but for the most part, all of the characters in this book, I like them. They're complicated people. Nobody's just super nice and good. Nobody's terrible and monstrous. They're tormented to greater and lesser degrees. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's one of the things I always say, and it's why I like people. I like talking to people. Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got their stuff. Everybody's got their past or their baggage, and that's kind of what makes people interesting. And it brings me to my next point, which is, Darla, who, again, front and center on the cover here, everybody, if you're watching us on YouTube, as kind of our main character POV of the framing part of the story. But like you said, this isn't heroes and villains. It's not like she's, perfect and doesn't have her, flaws and foibles as well. So I'm curious, as sort of the closest thing that we have to a POV character in the story, how much of your sensibility is in Darla?
Probably, I would say probably that's a nice hedge. I would say a fair amount. But in I feel like I should close my window. They're doing work outside. Is that coming?
No, it's not. It's not coming through at all. No, we're fine.
Okay, all right. I should have closed it. Anyway, she is very young. She's a 23-year-old, and she's trying to find her way. I mean, her thing is really wrestling with imposter syndrome, not really being very sure of her own creative voice. And so she's straddling that fence between being judgy of these people who come to her to the shop and that she works, and also envying them, especially their self-confidence. It's this thing where it's like, there are various scenes in the book where she's got her little notebook with her and she's just feeling completely like a fraud.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something I've wrestled with over the years. I mean, been at this a long time. I don't really feel like an imposter anymore. I have other things that kind of gnaw away at me creatively, but at least I feel like I've pretty much earned my place in the industry. But it's a tough thing. And it's, I'm hoping people who read this, especially people who do have their thing and maybe they want to get the confidence and enough to share it with the world. The original title for this, I started this actually back in 2012, and then it hibernated for a long time, and then I did the bulk of it a couple of years ago. But the original title, which ended up becoming too cliche, was Thanks for Sharing, which, based on inflection can be very sarcastic or very sincere, as with most sentiments. But really, there's a bonus section at the end of the book, which I'm very, very proud of and had a lot of fun with, which is a dossier of samples of all of the characters' work.
Mm-hmm.
and in various styles and various kinds of things. And that was a lot of fun to do, but it also even more gave me an opportunity to kind of get inside their heads a bit. Because, one is a person who writes what they call cozy mysteries, and
Yeah.
that's not my world at all, but it's a very big, I don't know, when does a cottage industry become bigger than a cottage? It's a
Right.
big
Yeah.
industry. So you have one of those, you have a vegan collective who kind of put out a newsletter. There are all these, there's one who puts out, let's just say, very strange children's books.
Hmm.
And I wanted to really get inside their heads, and there was no better way to do that than actually come up with samples of their work. And I think that's a nice uh, I don't even want to call it bonus material, but I think it augments the story very nicely.
Yeah, it makes it feel a little more authentic, a little more real, a little more immersive. I think, and it's fascinating. I think my favorite character, is the guy that sort of came along after the big underground comics movement, of the '70s. He sort of missed it, but he's still trying to live in that, and it's still trying to see New York as that. Which is really interesting. Obviously, you live in New York City, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Well, no, actually, I'm in Los Angeles,
oh,
but
really?
I was a New Yorker for 5 decades, so I've
Okay.
earned my cred.
Yeah, 100%. Well, the reason I bring that up is this whole idea, and it is a cliched idea, but it certainly is present here in this book. The idea of the city as a character. I don't think this works in, maybe it would, but maybe not as well in another city, because New York is just such a melting pot. And again, it adds to the verisimilitude of Darla working in this print shop and all walks of life coming in here to print their work. So is that something, as a New Yorker for 50 years, that was kind of front and center when you first came up with this idea? Hey, I nowhere else but New York can I have this as a setting?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I said it in the neighborhood where I lived, which was Morningside Heights, which is right near Columbia University.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Going on, there's a big scene with the the guy who writes a very racist, overtly racist cosmic horror. There's a whole big scene with him getting into a debate, and it's very kind of theological and sociological and all that kind of thing. And it's right in front of the gates of Columbia University. So yeah, setting it in that neighborhood in particular, and it does come up in the dialogue because the two girls are pretty hip girls, and one of them is attending Columbia. And, Darla at one point's like, why is it so square? Like, why don't you go down to NYU? And she's just like, what? And have to travel? It's
Yeah.
she's a very convenience-based character.
Yep.
She's like, I don't need to get on the subway to go do that. But there was, this is the thing, it's no longer there, but there was a copy shop on my block. And, when I would go in there were always interesting characters just making life a little spicy for the poor people behind the counter. So speaking of empathy, I always would kind of look and think, boy, I'm glad I'm just here to make a few photocopies or whatever, because and Darla is at least a little bit based on a friend of mine who used to work at a copy shop down in the village, and again she had to deal with a lot. And so yeah, it's a big, broad spectrum to play with. I actually am writing a sequel now called Printopia West, where I'm taking these two characters to Los Angeles because I feel I've been here long enough, and LA has its own kind of
Oh
characters. So
yeah.
something with these two, sort of fish out of water story of Darla, very New York Darla, now confronting the LA side of the country. So
Oh wow. I'm really excited to hear that. That sounds like it's rife with potential, and I can't wait to check it out. Because I just loved this, and yeah, I mean, so I live in Phoenix now, but born and raised in California for first 42 years of my life, and very familiar with LA and all the tropes down there. So yeah, very excited to check that out. Any idea? Just in the midst of working on it, so probably don't have any idea on a release date or anything yet, huh?
No, I mean, realistically, let's say 2026.
Yeah.
Because I'm also working on another project, sort of between them, as kind of a palette cleanser. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but I'm hatching something that will be very different than anything I've done, and I think people will be excited about it, which will be kind of in the mold of titles like Eight Ball, the old Eight Ball, where they were solo anthologies where you could do all kinds of different short stories and maybe
Yep.
one serialized thing. I've never done one of those. And it feels like now's the time. So I'm going to do that between this and Printopia West. So a lot to keep me busy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good to pivot and to challenge yourself and try new things, and then kind of recharges your batteries to go back and visit this world and these characters again. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing, Bob, we're talking about the diversity of the different characters. Um, it's all drawn by you, and it's clearly your style. But where the visuals, where the diversity comes in, is in the color work, right? Like particularly for each character, each of these characters that Darla meets, and they have their creative thing, a little bit of a different sort of color palette that we get. Was that something that you had planned right from the start? Can you talk a little bit about the choice to go that direction visually?
Yeah, once when I first was hatching this, like I say, a decade ago at this point, a little more than a decade ago, I didn't, I had only done the first 24 pages, and even what you see in this book is radically revised from that. Because, it was when I did say, I finally want to finish this, I looked at those pages and thought, okay, I need to scrap a lot of this and kind of restart. But when I restarted it, I thought, what would be a nice visual, basically a cue for the reader? We are now shifting to a different POV.
Mm-hmm.
So not just different color, kind of it's mostly monochromatic, but some of it extends to a little bit of full color here and there. So yeah, kind of going into these different characters' lives, different color palettes. In the case of the Sally, the one who does the weird kids books, hers is actually also very textural on um, construction paper. Kids' construction paper always had that gritty
Yeah.
kind of texture. So her chapter has that kind of integrated into it and sort of white chalk highlights, that kind of thing. So she's got one look. The post underground comics guy, his was the most fun because I really dove into sort of what I thought the world would look like in his head.
Yeah.
And so it's his is kind of a melange of like George Gross and Raw magazine and all of these kind of different visual elements with a bit of a, halftone texturing, and his is all kind of on a very pulpy, newsprinty kind of texture. So yeah, it was visually it was fun because every character provided new challenges.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I wasn't expecting. I've seen your work before, and everything I've seen has been sort of fully colored. So right away, that monochromatic, it really grabbed me. And even when in the framing pieces, there is a texture, and everybody, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can kind of see that here in the background that I pulled from one of the panels of the book. Which again, I think sort of adds to that sort of underground comics feel. Because that's the other thing that I want to mention here as we're coming to a close is this juxtaposition that you got with the POV characters of Darla and to some extent Candy feeling very hip, like you said, very modern, but so many of these other characters and creators sort of stuck in their time, and especially the underground comics guy, and they don't come right out and say it, but you almost get the sense that they're looking back with nostalgia and rose-colored glasses and, hey, weren't things better when? And I find that to be really interesting, and I think the choice of monochromatic, almost sepia at times, really helps to enhance that. So was that something that was a conscious choice, or was it kind of more serendipitous?
Yeah, no, I think the palettes reflect kind of where those characters' heads are. Again, that underground cartoonist Patches, um, he's definitely looking back with nostalgia, and that's where his figment. He has a little kind of weird, lumpy superhero character named
Yeah.
Fisto, and Fisto's there. That's why they have these dialogues, because Fisto's kind of reminding him things weren't necessarily that rosy.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you're letting nostalgia cloud your memories, and so it was a way. Those figments are also there because, like, how do you, when characters are alone, how do you have them? Just showing somebody thinking would be very boring. So if you can have them having these exchanges basically with their own brain, this is that thing of like the duality of the self, where I sometimes it feels like there's a brain on top of the brain, the meta brain that's talking to you. Like it's the one that'll address you in third person. Hey, Bob, what are you thinking here? What are you doing?
Yeah.
I think everybody has that to some degree when they start, especially when they start becoming very introspective, and it's just like, okay, don't go too far down the rabbit hole. There's got to be this sort of meta voice that's pulling you back and saying, okay, stay
Yep.
on
Yeah,
target.
stay on tower. Is this really working? I think especially true of creatives. I'm not necessarily a creative in terms of writing or illustrating, but I have so many friends that are, and been doing this podcast and YouTube channel long enough, and that I can completely relate. Like, start doing something, even if I'm just putting together background graphics or what have you, and I'm like, does that really work? Like, it is such a solitary thing, right, to create, and so you almost need that. Where's my sounding board? Who am I, playing off of? So very, very relatable, I think, for a lot of creatives.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, why don't we let everybody know where they can get their hands on Printopia? Is there a particular place to go? Do you have a website? Where's the best place to both pick it up and to keep abreast of work you have coming up next?
Well, I mean, the easiest obviously is Amazon, because everybody's got an account there. But you can also order directly from the publisher, which I should have mentioned, Cosmic Lion Productions, because they actually have signed copies. They even have some sketched copies available. So you can just go over to cosmiclionproductions.com and find it there. So Amazon, that. There's also a link on my website, which is just bobfingerman.com. So
Great. I'll put a link to both Bob's website and the Cosmic Lion website, everybody, in the show notes. So if you're having trouble finding it, either place you can go and click there. So, Bob, I love the book. It's really fantastic. I'm already looking forward to the sequel whenever that comes out. Again, putting these two characters in California, I can't wait to see what hijinks and what crazy characters they meet next. So thanks for taking the time to talk to me today about the project.
Oh, thank you so much, Jace. I really appreciate it.
To everybody out there in the audience, whether you're checking us out on YouTube or listening to the audio feed, Bob and I both want to thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.